A very warm welcome to you for this Inspiring Careers Using Space as a Theme talk. So we've never done a talk quite like this before, and I think it's a really interesting topic because space is such a hot topic for young people, and so exciting that I think it's something that we believe is a great starting point and a sort of springboard to get students enthusiastic about careers as a starting point. So we're welcoming today Tara Rutley, who is IEO Lab Science Strategic Officer and also NASA Associate Chief Scientist for the Exploration and Applied Research. So welcome to you, Tara. And we've also got Tom Lyons from STEM Learning, who's the enrichment lead, who's going to be talking about some of the other resources that you can link to as part of the European Space Agency. So lots of information here, and I think you'll find it really, really useful. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Tara. Thank you, Tara.
Thanks, Helen. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon from Arlington, Virginia, the United States, right outside of Washington, D.C. It's good to see your faces from across the world. As Helen said, I do work for NASA. I'm an Associate Chief Scientist for Exploration Research, and I also work with IEO Labs as well to bring content to educators and students about science and engineering, STEM topics. So I'm going to share with you over the next 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, a little bit about my story, a little bit about inspiration that comes from being participants in anything related to space. And we're also going to talk about possible future careers and places that students may want to go with their STEM experience as you teach them and they learn with you. And then Tom's going to share some awesome ESA links, because ESA is one of our really great partners at NASA, especially with the International Space Station program that I work in. So I am going to start by sharing my screen, and let's see if I can do this. We practiced it and it worked once, and here we go. Okay, can you see that okay? Thumbs up. I can see you too, which is great. Okay, so well, I already talked about that, but I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and as a kid, what got me inspired to join the space program, or you know, because back then the word STEM hadn't even been created yet. It was pretty much, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And in fact, I grew up in Southern Louisiana. My sister and I were the daughter of my mom, who was just, you know, trying to make ends meet for us. I had come from a divorced family, so she had no clue of anything to do with space. My family had not been to college before. No one knew anything about anything that was going through my mind, but I saw these images that I'm showing you on my screen right now. I grew up as a kid in the 80s, where the space shuttle was brand new and was launched in 1981. And I was about, 7 years old when that happened, 6 or 7 years old. But the image on the left is what got me the most interested in what the heck was going on inside these space shuttles. And inside of the payload bay, I would see astronauts doing these science experiments. You know, they were either spinning in chairs or making themselves up with all this equipment you see now, drawing blood, playing with flames and studying flame behavior in space, and looking at how water behaved in space in all these different ways, and all these visuals and things in science that I had never seen before here on Earth, and I never ever experienced in a classroom. So for me, I would always tune into every shuttle launch, and any chance I got, I would even stay home from school if I could watch the experiments that were happening on TV. So this is what inspired me really, really early. What also inspired me early, though, was archaeology, dinosaurs. That was paleontology. So kids love space and dinosaurs at an early age. It's a common thing. For me, though, that love of space took over more than the dinosaurs did, but I'm not done with archaeology, so I'll come back to that later. But so I knew in about 3rd grade what I wanted to do was work for NASA, and in particular, I wanted to be an astronaut. Now, growing up, they said, you know, oh, Tara, if you want to be an astronaut, you want to work for NASA, you've got to be an engineer. Again, the word STEM hadn't been created yet. So you've got to be an engineer. And, you know, I started going through middle school and through high school. I was like, well, my preference is science, not exactly engineering. I don't really care about taking things apart and putting it back together, but I really think the human body is a fascinating machine in itself. that was created by nature, right? So in high school, we were fortunate enough to take a 3-hour field trip from Lafayette, Louisiana, over to Houston, Texas, to the Johnson Space Center, where I got to meet an astronaut. And I said, what do I have to do to be an astronaut? Just tell me. And he said, well, not everyone gets selected to be an astronaut. It's pretty challenging, but if you do what you love and you get really good at it, and you meet the minimum requirements of what we want in an astronaut, well, then you'll be happy and successful in your career no matter what happens with the astronaut thing, right? You can apply and never get in, but the goal is to have enjoyed your full career and be successful and happy. So ultimately, that's what I did. I went into science. So, but when we think about STEM these days, now that we have the word that's been around for many, many years now, we think of these skills that are on the screen here in our students, right? If you're a problem solver, or you're inquisitory, or you are creative, or you're really good at math and science, or you're a collaborator, these are all the things that make a good STEMist. But was I any of these things back then when I didn't even know these terminologies existed? I don't know. I had probably pretty good inquiry skills. I had many questions, but I didn't know what to do with any of this. I wasn't developed. Was I creative? I don't know. I don't consider myself creative these days, which could probably be argued. I loved science. Math was my weakness. I will admit I was not that great. It wasn't my favorite thing. But today, what we do is we kind of think about students, and we look for these skills in students to say, hey, you might be a good STEMist, but that's not always the case. Some students aren't inherently born with these skills, right? But there's one thing that they all are born with. We are all born with, and that is the desire to answer the big questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Each of us has this piece of interest of adventure. It's a tiny little flame of adventure. Even those who claim they're not, it's in there somewhere. And that's part of the human spirit, is adventure. So when I talk about STEM to students, I talk about the outcome, the adventure, or where do you see yourself? And for me, I ended up here working for NASA, fortunately, on the International Space Station. I had gotten a few degrees, my biology degree, and then I was talked into a mechanical engineering degree, which is a whole nother story. But I ended up with both those degrees, and then ultimately a PhD in neuroscience, because I loved education. No one said, hey, Tara, go and do STEM back then. But I knew the outcome would be space for me, and it was the adventure for me. I wanted to be part of this opportunity. So I started my career at NASA in 2001, working for the International Space Station program. Guess what? I started out as an engineer. They had created a new environment called the Biomedical Systems Division, and they wanted me to build exercise equipment and medical equipment for the space station. Now, this was something I had never foreseen before, and the word STEM still wasn't used yet. And so I joined the space station, and I've worked my entire career for the International Space Station. And that the space station, just as a refresher, I'm sure most of you know, it is an orbiting laboratory. It's about the size, the volume of a 5-bedroom house, for which ESA is one of our partners, our international partners. We work really closely with them. I have great colleagues at ESA. It is located about 250 miles above the Earth's surface. It's not that far. And it goes around the Earth about once every 90 minutes, and it's traveling really quick. It's like 17,500 miles per hour. But the reason we've developed this laboratory in space is because there are things that you can do there that you cannot do anywhere on Earth. These are new discoveries that happen when you take the big gravity vector away. Okay, and I'll get back to that in a minute, and how this is an important topic when you're talking about space and discovery. But before I go forward, I think it's important to go backwards a bit. So these jobs, these careers that you're seeing on the screen in front of you, are careers that didn't even exist 10, 15 years ago. These are things we could not have conceived of. And we're there again, and we're there again now. So a driverless car engineer, who thought 15 years ago that you would be doing that? What's a cloud architect 15 years ago? What's a cloud? Who's going to create clouds? Sustainability consultant. We knew decades ago that we had a climate crisis on our hands, but were they called consultants? Did we actually call people up to say, hey, we need you to help design improvements in the way that we work as human beings that have a minimal impact on our climate. What's an app developer? And by the way, what big data? What the heck is big data? Comes along with the cloud, right? So these are, you gotta put yourself in the mindset now as teachers and educators of the future of our workforce. Think about the jobs that don't even exist yet. It's a really challenging thing to do, but it's part of the critical process as you're working with a student who might possibly be interested in STEM and have an impact in STEM. And now back to that critical thinking part, or why space is inspirational in STEM. I'm going to play all these videos for you at once. They may make your head explode, but since we are virtual, I'm not sure which ones are going to work at the same time or not. The point about space, what makes it so different and unique from every other career out there, is it's a different way of thinking. It's not an intuitive way of thinking, because as you all teach in your classrooms, the basic physical laws that are all surrounding the big G, the big 9.1 meters per second squared gravity vector. You're teaching things like sedimentation and convection and buoyancy. And these are things that when on Earth, it's all predictable. You know that if you have a cough medicine bottle and you have it sitting around for a while, all the good stuff sediments to the bottom. You got to shake that up to get the good stuff to spread through suspension before you take it, right? But in space, if you shook that up, that sedimentation doesn't exist. Those particles will remain suspended. And it's a different way of thinking, because as a scientist, you can actually focus in on those particles and look at how they interact with each other. How are they going to self-modulate? How are they going to attach to each other? Are they going to repel each other? What does that mean for things like smart fluids, or the future of car brake designs, or earthquake dampening devices? And even convection is a gravity-based force that you teach about. Well, in space, this is what fire burning looks like. This is a flame. It's a round spherical flame, because there is no hot air rising and there is no cold air sinking. There's no difference in density. So you have a different flame. What does that mean? That means it's a new way to study the different levels of what's happening in that flame, so we can better put out fires, we can better start fires, and both on Earth and in space, and understand truly how that happens. Also, buoyancy, again, that is a gravity-dependent force. You teach about these fundamental forces. Make them exciting by talking about what happens when you don't have gravity. Explain that in this case, what you're seeing with buoyancy is water heating up. On the left, you've got Earth. On the right, you've got microgravity. And on the right, you can see, rather than tiny little bubbles that rise to the surface, there is no rising in space. There is no sinking of cold water. Again, here we are. Instead, you get the development of one large bubble of heat. It's carrying heat. That is heat transfer. How are you going to heat up the rest of that water if all of that heat is trapped inside of one bubble? It's not the same in space as it is on Earth. And there are applications both in space, in developing vehicles and habitats, as the same as there is on Earth, about understanding how boiling works, and buoyancy and convection and sedimentation. Now, if you're interested as a teacher and educator and getting more curricula just on the basics of microgravity and things that I just now mentioned, you can go to nasa.gov STEM on Station, that link at the bottom, and Tom will probably share some more links that you can go to with ESA. We've got tons of curricula that you can teach your classes to your students about why microgravity and why gravity. And why microgravity is because, just like when I was a kid, we have been seeing things on the International Space Station for the last 20 years that no one has seen before. And that's the expeditionary spirit, and that is the adventure spirit. You get to be the first scientist or engineer to design a piece of hardware that's unlike anything designed for use on Earth, and unlike any kind of science and results that we've ever seen on Earth. And then what do you do with that? That's the next question. Well, what do you do with that? You help us. You help us go further to the next step beyond low Earth orbit. We are planning on going back to the moon. The United States is going back to the moon under the Artemis missions, and we have partnership with ESA and others as well, just like we have with our international partnership for the space station. Now we think ahead. what can these kind of discoveries and what are your future students going to be doing with the space programs that are available? Going back to the moon, these are careers, again, this is the only ones that I can think of now because I don't know what the future holds. There will guaranteed be careers on this list that none of us here have been able to think about 15, 20 years from now, because also then we're going to Mars. So in the meantime, what we're thinking of and what our interns are thinking of are things like space architects, space constructions, building the habitats, 3D printing habitats, space agriculturalists. I mean, we need to grow plants. Can the plants live on the lunar regolith? We need to feed our humans. We can't just keep bringing stuff. Robot developers, space psychologists. So as human beings travel beyond the Earth orbit and stay on the moon longer than they did for the Apollo missions, now we're talking several weeks, looking back at the Earth for several weeks, what does that do to your mentality? And maybe we need space psychologists to talk to the astronauts constantly, and space engineers, space biologists, space medics, space lawyers, because as more of us are going to the moon, we're going to take all our human challenges with us and all of our human policy challenges with us. So space lawyers, space weather analysts, the weather that comes from the sun that will impact us living on the moon. So in my mind, these are only the ones that I can think of now as I'm inside of NASA and working with our partners and working with our interns to go, what's coming up, trying to figure out what's coming up. But I guarantee there will be things on the list that your students are going to create, possibly in your classroom, when you give them the spark of space flight, or you give them the spark of why space. Why space? Well, ultimately, it's what drove me to STEM was the adventure of it, right? And now I know it's a word STEM, and you all are teaching the word STEM, and you're teaching curricula around the word STEM. It's the adventure of it. And sometimes we tend to discount that part in our students and younger individuals. So perhaps we should be asking what their particular passion is, instead of what do you want to be when you grow up? Like I got a lot, right? What's your passion? And how do you want to fix something within that passion? My passion after astronaut, like I said, was paleontology or archaeology. Archaeology is the study of human existence. And when I ultimately got through the astronaut selection process, and I wasn't one of the 8 selected out of 7,000, I started to wonder, to go back and just ask myself, okay, what else is there? Space has been so great and so amazing and fun. For me, though, there were more passions when I was a kid. What were they? And were they STEM related? I thought, yeah, archaeology was it. Archaeology was fun for me as a kid. It was a great idea. So, I decided it wasn't too late to just go and return to that interest. So I went back just a few years ago and completed a master's degree in archaeology in 2018. So what shocked me about the archaeology degree was I thought I was going into a STEM program, but I should have known better, of course, because it was a Master of Arts. And what came out of this was an all new knowledge of what's happening with arts and humanities. And as a STEMist, I got to think, this is more than just taking measurements, using hands and skills and tools and taking measurements and analyzing things, data, to get to an answer. No, humans, my research was on studying the enslaved populations of US plantations pre-Civil War and their religious practices. There's nothing about science really in that. It taught me a new way of thinking as a STEMist. Everything I had learned as a biologist is applied to humans and human behavior, right? And it also taught me that my STEM studies could be used in areas of social justice. So what taught me, what going back as an archaeologist and really having to learn a new way to write, a new way to speak as a humanities student, what it taught me was scientists and humanities people, social scientists, need each other. They each have challenges to solve, and they've come together. And if you can get them together, boy, make that network and that connection and that collaboration, because you can be the strongest when you can combine the two together. You can solve the big problems for humanity. And those big problems, are already clearly identified through the United Nations. So when I am speaking with students and I'm speaking to interns and I know that they've got that spark in their eye to solve the world's big problems, it's not that hard for them to create a roadmap based on the problems that the world has already identified together, right? And how my skills and my work at NASA now, I think about this every day, is aligning with the world's biggest problems. So maybe we should, in fact, be asking our students, what's your passion and what problem can you solve with that? And how, the other issue that I've come across is we should be asking our students, how can they want to remain in their local community that in many instances maybe sparse, with little resources, little opportunities. Maybe they want to run and get the heck out of there like I did in Louisiana. I wanted to run from Louisiana as fast as I could graduate high school. But maybe we should be having those discussions about how they can use their skills and passions to solve the community challenges that they're in already. Don't leave, don't run. We need your passions, we need your talent, we need you to work and make your community better. And you start with community and then you go global, you go bigger. And so quality education, good health, good well-being, gender equality, clean water, sanitation, these are all things that people care about. They don't know that STEM is part of all of this. And NASA is part of this. Gender equality, affordable and clean energy, decent work, economic growth, these are all part of the UN Sustainable Goals. And I will tell you also, ESA has a great website on how their space agency is contributing directly to the UN's sustainable goals too. So I would definitely recommend, if you have an interest in tying space to the big problems that the UN's identifying, ESA has done a great job keeping up with exactly how they're doing that. And so I'd recommend that as a good resource. Let's see. Finally, I want to say again, these are, when I think about STEM, I think about adventure. I think about the end result. I think about the journey to get there. Adventure is something different for everybody. Someone's adventure might be, you know, climbing a mountain and learning about sustainability so that they can improve tourism challenges that are out there. Someone else's idea of an adventure might be sitting at a desk, working at a computer, fighting the bad guys in cybersecurity. It's different, but it's all STEM. And so if we have more conversation about the different roles that these students can see themselves in, using the unique resources of the spaceflight environment to challenge new thinking and spark new thinkings and get them to think, hey, there's another way to think about things out there that's not like every day. Maybe I'm that person, maybe I can contribute to the space program. And even if they don't end up in the space program, I'd like to think that their participation and their mindset of having been a part of the space program has contributed to whatever it is they go on to do things next. I grew up with students who went to space camp with me. They loved space. They didn't necessarily go into the space program, but they're out doing things that they love and that they know that they are skilled for. And that's what we really want to encourage in our next generation of students. With that, I'm going to bring this all to a close, but I wanted to share with you a picture of the United Kingdom from the International Space Station. This is where you are, most of you are right now. You can see in the top right corner, that's just a piece of the space station's radiators and solar arrays that are kind of right at the top of the picture there. And with that, do we take questions now, or do we go through Tom and then take questions at the end?
No, I can ask you, there are a couple of questions actually, Tara. Thank you so much. First of all, what is a user interface designer?
A user interface designer. Oh, great. Yeah, so I'm sitting at my computer right now, or my daughter, who's 14, like many of the ones you teach, are going to play a game. And even the games in your classrooms that you use for education are part of something that a user interface designer has created. Any piece of technology that interfaces with the human is a user interface designer, designing the best for humans. You got to know things about human behavior, colors, and how they affect human behavior, sound, the noise, the calmness, the hyped up of an environment. The reach, sometimes it's called anthropometrics. Can this person adequately access what you're designing for them, and think of all the different body types, all the different ability types, all the different cultures, all of it. You would be designing an interface for that human.
Yeah, thank you. So it kind of brings in ergonomics, and you talked about, I love the idea of space psychologists, and I think it's all those things that we just can't even imagine, as you say now, but it's starting to happen already. So fantastic to hear about some of those, and just so inspirational, really. So thank you very much. Tara, is there anybody else who'd like to ask Tara a question? You can unmute if you would like to, or ask away in the chat. We'll come back
away.
Otherwise. So yes, somebody has said, Philippa, I agree, the term STEMist, I think that's one that we're going to be using a lot from now on. I can definitely I definitely think that's that you coined a great term there, so thank you. Okay, so if you think of anything else, please pop it in the chat. But we're going to pass over to Tom Lyons now from our own STEM Learning, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the great resources you might be able to tap into to share with your students. Thanks, Tom.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I will just find the right thing to share. So yeah, I'm from STEM Learning. I'm the STEM enrichment lead there. There we go, found the right thing. So I'm going to talk to you about kind of space careers and the resources out there from the kind of UK perspective here. So the first thing to say, try and get this to move on, and it's not moving on for some reason. There we go. Yeah, the first thing, this might sound a bit unkind after Tara's just spoken, and this isn't really directed at her. This is more about the way it's perceived in the UK. There's a lot of people that will think, and the media being one of them, they think space, they think NASA, and NASA is doing an awful lot, obviously, but it's not recognized so much in this country that we do have our own space agency, and we are part of the European Space Agency. So for students that are in this country and they're thinking about that kind of thing, you know, they get inspired by something to do with space. What we don't want them to think is that's unattainable, because I'd have to go to America, I'd have to do it there, or I'd have to go to Russia or something. So it's getting that message across partly. So we've got a picture of Tim Peake there. Obviously, he raised the profile of space within the UK when he went to space in 2015 and did an awful lot of work with us in terms of education. You can see he's our first honorary STEM ambassador, and there he was receiving that here in York. And he, as I said, he does an awful lot, but Tim is just one of the many people that are involved in the space industry, and people often think it's, you know, it is just astronauts. But as Tara was saying, there's all sorts of careers involved in it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and the resources that you can access. So as I said, we're part of the European Space Agency. So there's a number of member states in the European Space Agency. And if you want to know how much we kind of contribute in terms of the cost per person or per taxpayer per year, it only works out as something like the cost of a cinema ticket per year. So into all these different areas, not just the human spaceflight bit, but all sorts of different areas that we contribute to. So in fact, these are the main all the programs of the European Space Agency. So we do, I mean, ESA does space science, so it's things like going out into doing things like the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to be launched on the 22nd of this month, and that's a joint thing with ESA, NASA, and the Canadian Space Agency, and I was going to touch upon that a bit later on as well. There's human and robotic exploration, so that's again going back to what Tara was talking about with the International Space Station. We're involved with that. We are part of the, you know, we have ESA astronauts, and Tim is one of the ESA astronauts. Hopefully will fly again. And then there's space transportation. So obviously you have to get the satellites and the space station up into space in the first place, so you need launchers. And the European Space Agency has their own Ariane launchers that they launch from French Guiana. There's all the engineering and technology behind it. So all the different materials that you've got to create within space engineering. So and all the test equipment and all that kind of thing. And that you can see that kind of image behind that is something called an anechoic chamber, all those kind of funny spiky bits, and that's where you test antennas and things. So you have an environment where it kind of is like if you walk into one of those rooms, it's a bit spooky because you hear no echoes at all, and it sounds really dead in the room, because that's the idea of it, to absorb all that radiation. There's spacecraft operations, and there's things on the other side of it, looking at kind of the Earth itself, so not going out into space and all the kind of exploration side of it, but most of the work that ESA does, and most of the jobs around at the moment are things like Earth observation. So when we talk about Earth observation, it's things like climate monitoring, weathers, satellites, looking at all sorts of different aspects of the Earth's surface. And then there's telecommunications, so all of the kind of satellite TV, all the communication services associated with satellites, and also navigation, GPS. So you know what you use in your car every time you want to find somewhere you don't know where you're going. Europe has its own constellation of GPS satellites called Galileo, which work in complement the GPS ones from the US. So there's all those different strands that you can get involved with. Looking at the UK space industry itself, it's a growing industry. So it has, you can see that there's the report that gets put out every year on this, or every 2 years, on the size and the health of the space industry. So it's just, in the UK, it's obviously a lot smaller than in terms of the US spend, but it's 16.4 billion pounds per year, and that we actually make up 5% of the global kind of space economy just in the UK. And because we're talking about East of England, we're doing this as part of an East of England event, you can see the split in terms of space organizations. You can see we've got nearly 2,000 space organizations, probably more than that now, space organizations in the UK, and a lot of these are small and medium sized companies, and they're small startups that are working on innovative technology. But we do have some big kind of players in there, like Airbus and Thales Alenia, the ones that can get involved in the big missions. But people, well, you need people making all the little components, all the CCDs and things like that, the charge coupled displays that goes in the cameras, and batteries and things like that. In the UK, are involved in a lot of missions to do that kind of thing. I'm looking at the growth. As I said, it's a growing industry. So that when it says population growth there, that's the number of organizations within the UK. So it's growing sort of almost exponentially, and that's kind of to do with the fact that we have so many of these small organizations that are popping up. And again, that's in terms of employment. You can see a steady growth in terms of the number of employees. So that, and bearing in mind, you look at kind of growth from 2019, 2020, it was, the space industry was still growing during, and is still growing during, the pandemic. So it didn't, it's not one of these industries that it has taken a hit, because it all have, but it's still a thriving industry, and the government are putting more and more kind of money into it and more priority towards it. How does it work in terms of diversity? There was a Space Skills Alliance did a survey of space sector employees recently, and this gives some idea of the kind of split in terms of diversity. So obviously, it being a lot of engineers in it, a lot of physicists and that kind of thing, traditionally that there is a gender issue in terms of equality, and getting more girls into those kind of subjects. So you'll see it's 30% at the moment in terms of the space sector, which is better than, if you look at some engineering as a whole, it's better than that. So it's a little bit more balanced. But you can see there's, again, in terms of the kind of organizations by type, depending on which kind of part of the space sector you're in. If you're in kind of more of a government or not-for-profit thing, the gender balance is much better than it is in terms of kind of when you look at industry and particularly in military area. In terms of ethnicity, then again, for the whole workforce, if you look at the space kind of sector, it's not as good as the UK workforce as a whole in terms of the space sector or the technology workforce as a whole, but you know, it's getting there, I think. And I've also got some data there on the percentage of disabled people in the sector. So again, a little bit behind, but not too far. So I was going to just mention what's happening in the UK in terms of launching as well, because this is a big thing coming up next year, really, and it's building up now and has been for a number of years. So you'll see this is a map of the UK, and you'll see a number of different kind of launch sites that are planned or already in development in the UK. So again, you know, people think about launches, they might think about America, obviously, they think about maybe Russia. We launched to the space station from Kazakhstan, and up until recently that was the only way of doing it for a while. But this is not about launching up into deep space or launching to the space station with human spaceflight. This is all about launching small satellites. And the advantage of launching from the UK is that we can put things into what are called polar orbits. So the ones that the big sort of satellites, the telecommunications ones that go out and look at one point of the Earth are called geostationary, and they get launched from the equator because they get a big kick from the spin of the Earth to get out there. But if you're launching to a low Earth orbit and you want it to go over the poles, it actually helps to be closer to the poles in the first place. So this is why it kind of makes sense to be able to do this. And you can see there's different types. So there's going to be some in Scotland which are the kind of traditional way of launching things directly up into space from what's called a vertical launch. And then we've also got some horizontal launches, which are essentially strapping a rocket to the top of an aeroplane. So the one you can see, like Newquay, number 7 down there, that is going to be Virgin. That's going to be Virgin that's doing that one. So they probably will be one of the first, if not the first, to launch next year, hopefully using that system. So we can get things into orbit, small payloads that do these things like what I was saying about Earth observation and climate monitoring and weather monitoring, where there's a lot of data that we need to be able to tell us what's happening with the climate and inform us, you know, about the things, about the sustainability goals and how we're going to reach them, as Tara was talking about earlier. So watch out for that Launch UK, which there'll be more sort of, there's been bits in the news already, but there'll be more coming up on that. Just to talk about my kind of route into it in terms of the careers idea. So I went to a state secondary school, which is called a public school in the US, but not public school here, a private school in the US. But so I did A-levels in physics, mathematics, and sociology. So again, I was a bit split in terms of, am I interested in the way people work, or am I interested in the way things work? The things work kind of won, but I'm still interested in the way that people work. And as Tara was saying, we need to kind of know both to be able to make changes. So then I did a BSc in physics with environmental science at Sussex University. I then tried to get a job for a year and was doing various different things, temping, and found out that what I wanted to do, I kind of got started to get interested in space when I was at university. So I wasn't one of these children that I always want to go into space kind of thing or be an astronaut. It was when I started learning about things in my final year of university. Mostly some of the lectures I had, they were very inspirational. So I thought, actually I want to go back and do another year. So I did a master's in space science, and then I went on to be a payload systems engineer at what is now Airbus Defence and Space. So I was working on the test satellites for the Galileo system, which is, as I said, the GPS system, which is now just kind of finishing. The constellation is like 30 satellites, so they're just finishing kind of the launches of those now. So it gives you and that was when I started working on that in the design phase. That was in 2000. So, and now we're 2021. So it kind of gives you the idea that the length of time of some of these programs, some of the big programs, the same. And it used to be like that with all space programs. It would take a long time for anything to happen. Good reasons for it, because you need it to work when you get it up there. But now space is becoming cheaper, and you can reuse things that, you know, off-the-shelf equipment. You might be able to, for example, take things out of a you know, a PlayStation and send it up into space and use that kind of electronics because of the way the economies of scale and things that are working with that at the moment. And then I went off to become a teacher. So yeah, so a different route for me and where I am now. So there, but just there, as I was saying, that there's lots of different things that you can go through. And although I went, you know, the kind of degree route to get into what I'm doing, here's an example of something that's happening now, that the space engineering apprenticeships that you can get. So I just took this example of one of them. So the entry requirements for this are 5 GCSEs. So you're going in at, you know, very much entry level with this, and here's some of the big kind of slightly bigger companies involved in the UK, listed under the employers involved in creating the standard, bit at the bottom there if you can read that. So a number of those companies were involved in developing this for technician level, and that's an important kind of part that we have to think about. It's not all about people having, you know, going through higher education and stuff. We need people at all levels within the space industry. And another example I've given here is flight software engineer. Because if you think about what's happening with most space missions and the data that the big data, as Tara mentioned, the big data that's coming from that, we need a hell of a lot of people in terms of software, both in terms of the actual stuff that's being sent up there, but also analyzing that data when it comes back down again. And when I looked at this job, it didn't have any particular requirement in terms of degrees and things like that. Basically, what they wanted from you was to have, I mean, a lot of people who would end up this role might have done a degree. Having said that, you could be a brilliant programmer in C and debugging and that kind of stuff, and have done that yourself, kind of thing, and still be eligible for going for that job. And just to give you some links and some ideas of other places to look for careers in terms of the UK and wider in Europe. So there's a website called spacecareers.uk, and that website has actually been set up by some of the students that are part of an organization called UK SEDS, which also exists in America. We're started up in America. The UK Students for the Exploration and Discovery of Space, and they set up this website because they kind of saw a gap in the provision for this in the UK. They're thinking, well, where do I do a degree in space, and where do I go and find a job? And I actually kind of found that as well when I'd finished my master's. I was like, I don't actually know how I now get a job, and I happened to sign up with an agency that got me the job, but I didn't know about the space industry in the UK because I couldn't really find information at that time 20 years ago. But now that we've got spacecareers.uk, and we've also got, so this is our website here, the ESRO UK, European Space Education Resource Office, and we've got a number of profiles on that page about careers in space. And again, we're looking across loads of different kind of possible routes in, and we have got space lawyer on that page as well. And just in terms of more careers information, which is more generic, I've given you a link there as well, because we do, from STEM Learning, we do provide courses and careers information as well. So if you go to STEM careers, stem.org.uk/STEM careers, you'll find loads of information on there, and link out to you can link out to the space careers one from that as well. We also have a program called the 1 Million Interactions program. So this is funded by the UK Space Agency, and we run it with the Careers and Enterprise Company. And it's essentially to get more volunteers from the space industry out into schools, talking about what they're doing, interacting with children, or events and things like that. So if you are a STEM ambassador, you can sign up to this scheme as part of it on your profile, or if you're in a school, you can request a STEM ambassador, and we are trying to increase the number of STEM ambassadors that are signed up to the scheme. We know there's as I said, in theory we've got about 45,000 people in the UK who are part of that space industry in one way or another, and it's about getting more of those people visible in front of the children so that they can see the kind of careers that they could go into later on. And I said I would mention a couple of things, like the James Webb Space Telescope. It's launching on the 22nd at 12:20 in the UK. So this is a huge mission, and I remember doing some professional development on this for teachers in 2012, and we thought it was going to launch in 3 years' time. And this is one of these things with big space missions is delays, but it is actually going to launch now. It's sitting near to the launch pad, so hopefully, fingers crossed, it's all going to go off to plan. But there are all sorts of incredible things about this mission. It's worth having a look. The size of the mirror, the fact it has to be all folded up inside the launcher. It's got these huge sun shield at the bottom with several different layers to protect to cool the telescope, because it's going to look into the infrared and look into the early universe and tell us all about how our solar system came about, and look at the first stars and galaxies, and how did galaxies first form, and that kind of thing. So it's a bit like the new Hubble, but it's looking into kind of different aspects. And anyway, you'll hear more about that, I'm sure, in the news. So we've got that. There are, again, if you do a search for it, we've got on our site, we've got educational material around that as well, and also other things that we do in addition to kind of resources and doing teacher professional development. We've got competitions like CanSat. So again, CanSat was originated in the US. It's European Space Agency who've been running it for 10 years now, and we've been running it in the UK as part of the ESA competition. So it's essentially it's an engineering mission. You're building electronics inside something the size of a soft drinks can, and then you're launching it. We launch it with rockets now, and it parachutes down, and students have to take readings on the way down of things, temperature and pressure and things like that, but also things that they might decide on, like, am I going to look at UV levels? Am I going to look at carbon monoxide levels and all that kind of stuff? So it's a proper engineering challenge for students. So that, again, it's all signed up for this year, is all full, but for next year you can have a look on our website. AstroPi you can sign up for now, and that is, there's 2 Raspberry Pi computers on the International Space Station, and you can get your chance to run code in space on those Raspberry Pi computers. So you can write a bit of code. Either there's a kind of emulator program you can use online, or you can actually get, as part of this competition, you can get a kit sent out where you can code that, and then send your code off to be uploaded to the space station and run on a computer, and get your certificate saying my code ran in space. And the final thing I was going to mention in terms of kind of engagement at the moment, we're doing we did one thing this year called Mars Day, which was to link into the NASA Perseverance mission, but also kind of gearing people up for what Europe are doing around Mars. So next year there will be the launch of the ExoMars rover. So to celebrate that and the kind of anniversary of Perseverance-ish, we're doing a Mars Day and a Mars Week and a Mars Hour. So have a look for that as well on our website, and you can get involved. And we'll have things online, and we'll also have various different organisations running things across the country as well. And that was it for me. So I'll just leave my contact details on that last slide there, in case you want to write them down. But if we had any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Tom. I think Siobhan wanted to ask a question. Are you there? You could unmute and ask a question.
Oh, sorry, it is wrong because I couldn't get rid of the hand. I don't know how to do it.
Oh, don't worry. So you didn't have a question.
I
Okay.
tried to click the hand off, but they just don't let me. It's like a sticker
No,
there.
don't worry.
Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. I know that back a while ago, Philippa, you asked, what about languages? Would languages be used for these kind of careers? I mean, just the top of my head, working with Airbus as we do locally in Stevenage, you know, obviously they are a multinational company, so they definitely need people who can speak various different languages. Tara, Tom, have you got anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, I'll say something quickly and then pass over to Tara. But yeah, I mean, definitely in terms of the kind of, obviously Europe, that, you know, we're using all different types of languages. Obviously, English tends to be the common one, but it's very useful to, I mean, just in terms of the space station, obviously they speak Russian and they speak English up there. But I would say the major kind of players coming up now in terms of space are China and India. So there are all sorts of you know, collaborations that go on internationally, and its languages are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. We learned from the International Space Station that we're not going to go anywhere further without international partners, and so I myself had to learn some basic Russian, but you know, we've got Canada, we've got Japan, we've got the European Space Agency with all the different languages, and as Tom said, India, China, Russia, certainly players that I haven't even, well, we've also got Spanish-speaking nations that have signed up for the lunar programs that we're working on. So we have a whole office of what's called international relations here in NASA, and I'm sure that ESA and every space agency has that. And you're working across different time zones, different politics, different cultures, and of course, different languages. So absolutely, there's room for language, of course, in any space program that you decide to join.
Yeah, and a couple of queries came through about whether we're going to, we've recorded this session, so we'll send you the link to this after the session. So I'm going to put a link in the chat now for an evaluation. I'd really appreciate it if you can just click on the link and give us your feedback before you leave. So I'll do that now. And I'm going to stop recording, but thank you so much to our presenters, Tara Rutley and to Tom Lyons, for sharing some really good resources there, and really thought-provoking stuff, because it does, you can see how many fantastic opportunities there are. And we're very lucky in this part of the world that we've got Airbus on the doorstep as one of our big companies. But, you know, they're gearing up to the launch of the Rosalind Franklin Mars rover as well next year. There's so much going on with space at the moment. And as Tom said, it's just increasing so much. So there's a good chance that your students will be working in this industry or some aspect of it somewhere along the lines, you know, that lots of them will be involved in many of the different roles and support roles that there are linked to the space industry. So thank you very much to our presenters. Thank you for coming. Lovely to see you all. Do complete the evaluation before you go, and take care. Have a lovely Christmas.